Right, good afternoon. Welcome to the second or third one where one of our members answers the most frequently asked questions. It's a kind of a regular thing we do on a Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I mean, whatever industry or job we have, we always have those questions that people always ask us, okay? Those are the questions. So this Monday session is all about the specialist, the expert, the man with all the wisdom, all women answering those questions. And today we've got John Edward, who I met through networking, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, probably. Network all over the place, John.
I can remember that, yes.
Remember it well, can you? Yeah. So John Edward from... Was it Isha Oxford? I thought it was, yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, John Edward runs Mandara Wills, okay? So he's also a mortgage broker as well, I know that, and also very, very useful advice when it comes to protection insurance for me. So John's going to talk about wills today. A will, not as in Kate and Will, but the will that you have, that you need to have when you die. So these are brilliant questions, John. They're absolutely perfect. And these are questions that I've asked. I'm going to go straight into the one that my mum's asked constantly. Should I just write my own will down rather than paying to get it done?
It's an interesting thought, that. And the way in which I choose to answer that question is I can actually repair my own car. I can actually go out, open the bonnet, and I can do all the mechanical work on it. But do I really want to? Will I actually end up making a real mess of it because I don't really fully understand everything to do with a car and its mechanics? So yes, someone can do their own will, but they might miss something. And you know what? When they figure out they've missed something, they're up there looking down and they actually realize, oh, hell, that wasn't what I meant to happen with my will. So clearly, it's better to get a professional to do it rather than doing it yourself, because there's often things that can be suggested. It's a bit like an accountant. An accountant will say to you, yeah, you can do your own tax, but come to us and we'll probably save you money because we know things that you probably don't know.
And those wills you can buy at W.H. Smith for 20 quid. I mean, likewise, it's the same, aren't they?
Well, it's an interesting thing, the wills from W.H. Smith's. W.H. Smith's are still getting sued because they sold wills 25, 30 years ago, and they forgot to mention when they sold these wills that a beneficiary couldn't also witness the signature on a will. So over the years, people have actually been reading their parents' wills or friends' wills, and they found that they can't actually benefit because they actually witnessed the signing of the will. And so W.H. Smith's are still getting sued to this day for that particular fact. They forgot to mention that in their packs. So there's lots of problems associated with wills, and you've got to make sure that they're signed properly. You've got to make sure they're witnessed properly. And the thing is that you can have crossings out and you can have things that invalidate the will. I've seen plenty of wills that aren't signed.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan. Always use an expert. It's been one of my mottos throughout my life. If you want something done, get an expert. Absolutely. So, what happens? Another question. What leads on to what happens if you die and you don't have a will?
Well, if you don't have a will, it's an interesting thing because the government says if you haven't made a will, we'll decide how we distribute your estate. And let's take a situation with a husband and wife and 2 children. The government will say, well, as you didn't have a will, the first £270,000 will actually go to your spouse. The balance will be split equally between your spouse and your children. Now let's imagine your children are 2 and 3 years old. The money that's for them will have to be kept in a trust until they're 18. The other aspect is, let's imagine that is kept in a trust until they're 18, and they say on their 18th birthday, I want the money. Well, the type of trust it's kept in, they can have it as soon as they say they want it at age 18. So most 18-year-olds probably aren't really that good at managing money. So leaving it to the government to distribute your estate according to their rules, it's plagued with problems. And you might not want half of the money left to the children. you might want it all to be accessible by the wife or husband, etc. So that's the reason why you should make a will, because the government's formula is just not the right way of doing it.
Okay. I mean, and can a will be changed after your death?
This is known affectionately as a get out of jail free card for a solicitor. And what happens with a will is, if you draw up a will for a client and all of the beneficiaries who are likely to benefit from the will, if they agree to the changing of the will, there can be something which is done which is called a deed of variation. Now, a deed of variation means effectively the will can be rewritten. So it's a get out of jail free card if a solicitor's done it wrong.
Okay, interesting. And next question, again, one that I'm often in time, should you have your will stored or just keep it at home in a chest of drawers?
I had an interesting situation a few months ago. It's probably a year ago now. I went to see these clients and I was doing their will for them, and I talked to them about storage, and I explained that we have an organization called King's Court Trust who store wills sort of hundreds of feet underneath the ground in an ex-Ministry of Defense vault, and we would strongly recommend people store wills. Husband says, nah, not gonna bother with that. Wife says, yes, we are. And the wife said, one of my friends, she actually, her father died, and they were hunting high and low for his will. They knew he'd done one. Talk about a chest of drawers. British Heart Foundation came round and to take a chest of drawers, which was being donated to them, and they were taking it out of the apartment the chap lived in, and sellotaped to the base of the chest of drawers was the person's will. He'd left it in a safe place. Yeah. He'd forgotten to tell anyone else where he'd put it. So fortunately, they then had the will to be able to use. I would strongly recommend store the will. If they get lost, if they get damaged, if there's a fire, if there's anything like that, if the will's stored, you haven't got those problems, eventualities.
And you hold copies, don't you, presumably, of your clients' wills, do you?
I've got copies of the wills as well, but my copy, the copies which are stored, the clients get storage certificates for those, and the executors also get storage certificates so that they know where the will is.
Right. Okay, I mean, this next question is a good one, because I've heard you answer it a couple of times at networking event, and it was quite surprising, the answer. But so the question is it an honour to be asked to be an executor by someone?
Nick, let's imagine you and I have been mates all our life.
Well, okay. I wish.
You're roughly the same age as me, but you've aged better than me. You look far younger than me.
Thank you.
So let's imagine that we've been mates all of our life, and I say to you, Nick, I'm doing a will, and I need someone to be an executor. And you say, well, what does that mean? And I say, well, I mean, if I die, someone needs to sort everything out after I die, so that all the money that's left gets distributed to all the beneficiaries. Now, you probably, like I, before I got involved in doing wills, would actually view that as an honor. I'd think to myself, wow, that's really, they must really trust me if they think that I'll be able to sort out their estate and do everything. So let's imagine that you agreed to do that. And let's imagine that, unfortunately, I did pass. And what happens is you're now the executor. And you think, well, it can't be that difficult. And you start doing the work. And someone says to you, Nick, did you realize that if you distribute the estate according to the terms of the will and you get it wrong, and HMRC say you worked out the inheritance tax incorrectly, you're personally liable?
Yikes.
Now, how do you feel about that? Because you've distributed out the estate, and years later, HMRC come up to you and say, there's a liability of 20,000 because you didn't work everything out correctly. You're personally liable, so please could you pay up? And you say, well, I'll go back to the beneficiaries and I'll see if I can get some money back from them. And they say, sorry, mate, spent it all. Who's liable? You are. So let's imagine, Nick, that when you start sorting out my estate.
And let's face it, John, it's going to be considerable, let's face it.
Well, I would hope so. And with all my Zoco networking, it's going to get enhanced tremendously.
Yeah. I like what you did there.
Yeah. So let's imagine that you decide that you're going to sort out my estate and someone actually gives you some advice. And they say to you, Nick, you've got to make sure that you know what lifetime gifts John has made within the previous 7 years in order to be able to calculate inheritance tax. So you have to meticulously go through all of my bank statements to see if I gave some money to Fred Smith or Helen Jones or Nancy O'Reilly or whoever. So you do that, okay? And then the person tells you, but Nick, you've got to go back another 7 years. So 14 years in total to see if any gifts made within the first 7 years have an effect on the gifts made within the next 7 years to determine the inheritance tax. And you're scratching your head thinking, how do I get 14 years of bank statements, building society statements? How do I know that he didn't have an account 12 years ago that he closed? So do you start to see the problems of being an executor?
Yeah, when you ask me, John, it's a no from me, okay, if you don't mind.
I would strongly recommend to everyone, think very carefully about being an executor. If you are going to do it, find out exactly what you need to do before you agree to it.
Okay, but I mean, as lifelong mates, obviously, you make me a beneficiary, John. Obviously, that's fine. Absolutely.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Man, thank you. Well, last question about will before we move on to lasting power of attorneys. Okay, so I mean, again, who should you go to in order to get a will professionally written, John?
Well, there's two options really. You can go to a solicitor, and a solicitor will draw up a will for you. Now, there's different types of solicitors. There's solicitors who do a bit of everything, and they will have a good knowledge of arranging wills. There's solicitors who specialize in something which is called private client work, which is wills and estate planning and probate and things like that. Now, that type of solicitor will probably have a much more detailed understanding of arranging a will. Now, solicitors normally charge by the hour. So you might have a ordinary solicitor who's charging £150 an hour. You might have a private client solicitor who's charging £300 an hour. Now, what generally tends to happen is you have a choice when you arrange a will in exactly the same way, Nick, as with your car, you have a choice where you get it serviced. You could get it serviced through a main dealer. And what will happen is a main dealer will charge a certain amount of money for you to have your car serviced. That generally tends to be more money than an independent mechanic's. Doesn't mean to say that the independent mechanic isn't as good as the main dealer. So you could go to a will writer, and a will writer could be as good as a solicitor. A will writer is probably not going to be as good as a solicitor who specializes in private client work, but a will writer who does wills will do a really good job, and the chances are the fee is going to be considerably less than going to a solicitor, and vastly less than going to a solicitor specializing in private client work. So it's very much a question, choose someone who's aligned to one of the professional bodies like the Society of Will Writers or the Institute of Will Writers, and get advice and just make a decision based on who you feel comfortable dealing with.
Thank you, John. Now we'll move on to last 5 minutes, though, talking about lasting power of attorney. So before I ask the question, can you briefly remind us what is a lasting power of attorney, also known as an LPA?
Yeah, most certainly. Nick, I'm going to paint a little picture now, and the picture that I'm going to paint is you and I best mates.
You're scuba diving, aren't you, John?
Yep, scuba diving.
Also.
Yep, and you decide you're going to go off scuba diving to Egypt.
Yep.
So you decide to go off and you say to me, John, could you look after my affairs while I'm gone? Here's a power of attorney, which gives you the ability to look after my bank accounts, my building society accounts, my investments. And I say, great, Nick, I'll do what you want me to do. You've told me your instructions, I'll do what you want. So off you go to Egypt, you're 30 meters down and you come up a bit too quickly. What happens? You go into a coma. And at the point that you go into a coma, you've technically lost mental capacity. So unfortunately, you're in a hospital for 2 weeks, still in a coma, and I'm being expected to look after all your arrangements. So I go into Lloyds Bank, and Lloyds Bank say to me, oh, how is Nick doing? And I say, it's really bad, actually, because he had a diving accident and he went into a coma. Lloyds Bank then freeze the accounts, because a power of attorney can only be used whilst you have mental capacity. When you lose mental capacity, it's invalid. So a lasting power of attorney is something that can be used whilst you have mental capacity and if you lose mental capacity. So does that explain the differences between the two?
Yeah, kind of, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and you said, should a younger person have a lasting power of attorney? I mean, what age should we have an LPA?
Nick, what ages are your sons?
24 and 20.
Okay, so let's imagine your 24-year-old is married.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and your 24-year-old has a bank account with his wife. Mm-hmm. Okay, and unfortunately, your 24-year-old is cycling down the road and he gets knocked over by a car. And for a period of time, he's in a coma, technically lost mental capacity. So his wife goes into the bank and says, oh, I just need to sort out something for so-and-so. And the bank say, how's he doing? And she says, oh, he had an accident. He's in hospital. He's in a coma. Bank freezes the joint bank account. So should a younger person have a lasting power of attorney? Yes, most certainly. Because if someone loses mental capacity, their bank account is frozen. Their building society accounts are frozen. Any joint bank accounts they have are frozen as well. So think about it, people. Of the bank accounts that you have, the joint bank accounts that you have, how catastrophic would it be if that bank account got frozen? Mm-hmm. So the answer to your question, Nick, is yes, everyone should have them. Okay. Young people as well as old.
Yeah, and there's two types of, and there's the health one and the financial attorney, LPA, yeah?
That's correct, yeah. Mm-hmm. And you should have both. One deals with property and financial affairs, one deals with your health and welfare. Mm-hmm. So the one dealing with health, with property and financial affairs, that one can be set up to be used by the attorneys whenever. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine you have an older person who decides they don't lose mental capacity, but they just lose the inclination to want to do things. Mm-hmm. Things are a bit too much. So they say to their attorney, could you sort this out for me? Mm-hmm. Let's imagine your mum, Nick. Mm-hmm. She says, I don't want to sort out the shares. Can you do it for me, Nick? Lasting power of attorney, you can do it for her. Yeah. If your mum had lost mental capacity, you could do it for her. Mm-hmm. So while she's got it, you can do it. If she loses it. Health and welfare, this is vital, because if we lose mental capacity when we're in hospital, a lasting power of attorney with attorneys, the attorneys are then the voice of the patient. Mm-hmm. So vitally important.
Oh, very, very good. Very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, John. Let's go back to the gallery view. Who's still there? And do you have any questions for anyone in the room? Hello, Nikki. How are you? Lovely to see you. Missed you. Where have you been?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, no, just crazy busy, and yeah, all good. That's really interesting, John. There's a couple of questions actually I've got, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Lasting powers of attorney, do they have to be registered to be used? That's the old style, isn't it? But is that the same with the new ones?
Okay, lasting powers of attorney should be registered. I would go as far as saying I would not actually set up a lasting power of attorney for a client if it wasn't being registered, because the problem is, let's imagine you do all the paperwork, you don't bother getting it registered, and then when the client needs it, you go and get it, you want to get it registered, 9-10 week wait. What's
Is
the point
it?
of that?
Okay. So you should rather, so if the person's still got capacity, you should still just go straight in and register it.
Yeah, straight
anyway.
away. Yeah. And also the thing is, let's imagine that I draw up a lasting power of attorney for a client and I get it wrong. So they wait until they've lost mental capacity, then it gets sent in to see if it can be registered. And the Office of the Public Guardian comes back and says, sorry, incorrect. And we say, well, can we submit another one? And they say, well, if the person's got mental capacity, so if they haven't, never, ever do a lasting power of attorney without registering it. Always register it.
Right. And does that then mean, so if I got one from my mum
Yep.
is absolutely fine, sound mind and everything else, does that then mean that I could still make decisions for her? Or is it only once she's lost capacity that I can do that?
Okay, health and welfare only once she's lost capacity. Property and financial affairs, if she elects that it has power as soon as it's registered, any of the attorneys with her permission can make decisions on her behalf.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions, gang, in the room? I mean, the approximate cost of making a will, John, how much are we talking? I know we'll have to ask these questions. What are we talking to make a simple will, if such a thing exists?
Okay, if we arrange a simple will for clients, we anticipate the cost will be £180 for a single will. And if we're arranging a mirror will, which is two wills which are roughly the same, for say a couple, we charge £300 for that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. Any other questions before I wrap things up? No. Oh, Margaret. Yes, Margaret.
Yeah, I've got one. What's the cost of a lasting power of attorney then? What the costs involved there, John?
Okay, lasting powers of attorney are a lot more work. A lasting power of attorney has 20 pages. So if you're producing a lasting power of attorney, you would imagine that there's two lots of 20 pages for health and welfare and property and financial affairs. So our charge per lasting power of attorney is normally £300, but if we do two at the same time, we would charge £500 for that. And then if the client has earnings which are under £12,000 a year, then there's a registration fee. The normal registration fee is £82,
So
but the registration £82.
That's a normal one.
But if the earnings are under 12,000, registration fee drops to £41. So that's two lots of 82 if they can't claim reduction in fee due to low earnings.
Okay. And are your charges plus VAT?
At the moment, unfortunately, I don't have enough income to need to be registered for VAT.
Well, sometimes that's a good thing, isn't it? Because most solicitors are this is their cost, and then suddenly you've got a great big VAT on top of it.
No, the fee that we charge, the fee that we quote is the fee the client pays.
Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
And just backing to the will situation, John. So imagine this scenario that a father dies, no will. So there is a wife and there are 3 children. The 3 children are advised to sign off or sign the property to the mother, which they do. They, a couple of decades later, realized that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, or they were ill-advised. Is there anything that can be done now? Because obviously the mother is now probably in the last decade of her life, more than likely. And they are obviously now waiting to have a massive inheritance tax bill at some point in probably the next too distant future. Is anything can be done to revoke their decision when the father died, and they would have obviously inherited at the time, that they were advised to sign it off to the mother? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. there's two aspects to this. Were the original advising solicitors or legal people at fault for giving the wrong advice? That would be called into question. But if it's 30 years before, the chances of the people still being in practice are unlikely. But the thing that you need to remember about inheritance tax is there's something called a transferable nil rate band. So in a situation where you have a husband and wife, they both have an allowance of 325,000, which is free of inheritance tax. So if the wife or if the husband doesn't use that at the time of death, the wife can use it in the future. So let's imagine that the children were advised that they should transfer the property back to their mother. They still have that nil rate band to use. And now there's also something which is called a residence nil rate band, which is 175,000. And that 175,000 added to the 325,000 is 500,000. So if you have a couple with property under 1 million, that means two lots of 500,000. And provided the property is going to lineal descendants, the children, you have full eligibility for those allowances. So whilst they elected 30 years ago to do what was the equivalent of a deed of variation, which is saying we'll rewrite the will and we'll let mum have all of the property, I wonder whether they're really at much of a loss, because with the transferable nil rate bands, you can utilize those from the past if the elected person hasn't done so.
Okay, so basically they would have £1 million free of inheritance tax. So it's
They
just
could
the
potentially have that, yes. They would need to speak to a solicitor to verify that, or a legal professional to verify that. This is an area of law which is a prescribed activity, which that means that probate and dealing with someone's estate and the allowances and things like that, you'd need a probate specialist to advise on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good.
Okay.
Splendid. Thank you, John. That's wonderful. That's really, really good. I'm going to stop the recording now.